My name is Lenny Ryan, and this is the end of my 19th year of working with Research for Life. I cannot believe that. So I'm going to make some very brief comments about Research for Life and the context we're in now, and then I will introduce the two key individuals for this project that are our presenters today. Okay, since 2002, Research for Life has had a critical role in facilitating free and low-cost access to research subscriptions. You're all aware of that at non-for-profit institutions. There have been many hurdles, and there are many more hurdles remain in place for researchers in the global south, which is basically everyone at this audience. There's an urgency that there's an increased research participation is needed from underrepresented regions in working toward the UN Sustainable Development Goals, particularly SDG 17, which is the partnership for the goals, and we are a partnership project. The vision in the future, we had a big strategic plan, and we tweaked the vision a bit. It's the future transferring from one-way donation to a reciprocal engagement to enable diverse and rich scholarly exchange. So our aim for 2030 is to significantly increase participation of researchers from the LMICs in the global research community. We're committed to supporting local research networks in their capacity development. And if any of you know about the Country Connector project that started, I think, 3 years ago, coordinated by our colleague Blessing Mawire, this is a perfect example of this kind of collaboration. So it's reflected in many of our current activities, especially the Capacity Development Committee, which I am a member of, and includes this webinar, Understanding Predatory Publishers and How to Think, Check, Submit Can Help. So we're fortunate to have, as I said, the two key individuals that are work or volunteer, I don't know, for this project. We have Lorraine Estelle, who manages the daily activities of the Think, Check, Submit Committee. She'll explain what predatory publishing is, why it poses a threat, and how Think, Check, Submit can guide you to selecting respectable journals. Catherine Stephan, who is your researcher engagement librarian at Liverpool John Moores University, and is, as I said, she's a key person. She's the library representative to Think, Check, Submit Committee. So she'll share her practical experiences helping researchers choose trustworthy journals using this resource. So at that point, I'd like to turn it over to them, and Marcia will mention that we will make sure the presentation and the note and the video are available to you later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lenny, and thank you, Marcia, for enabling this webinar. And just want to start off by saying how excited Catherine and I are to be talking to you today, and how wonderful it was to see as you all came in, you announcing yourselves and saying which countries you're representing here. So I think we both feel this is really a great honor. So thank you for having us today. So we're here really to talk to you about predatory publishing and Think, Check, Submit. So I think the first thing that we want to really focus on today is how to support researchers in identifying trusted journals and publishers for their research. I say journals and publishers because there are, and I'm sure you're aware, predatory journals, they're quite well known, but there are also predatory book publishers as well. So we want to not forget them. So really how to identify the trusted ones and how to avoid the predatory ones. Could we have the next slide and then the one after, I think? Sorry, I've got ahead of it. So my name is Lorraine, And I will explain the issues around predatory publishing and how Think, Check, Submit can help researchers. But more importantly, Catherine will share her practical examples of using Think, Check, Submit principles to guide researchers in choosing where to publish. And Catherine, as Lenny said, she's the library representative on the Think, Check, Submit committee, and in her day job, she's very involved in helping researchers make these difficult decisions. So I think you'll find her part of the presentation particularly valuable. The next slide, please. So we need to be careful of predatory publishers because not all journals can be trusted for publishing your research. Some journals that are often called predatory journals only aim to make money by charging author fees. Now, there's nothing wrong, of course, with open access journals or open access book publishers charging author fees. But these journals that we're talking about here, these predatory journals, do not follow the proper academic process. They don't do proper peer review. They don't do proper editing, even if they claim to. So really, these publishers, these journals, are taking money under false pretenses. They're really tricking researchers into paying money to be published in journals that do not follow proper academic processes. Next slide, please. And there are some clear characteristics of predatory publishers. And this, in a way, makes it difficult to identify them because often they will publish on their websites misleading information. Misleading information about their impact, for example, which isn't true. And often they would take names which are very similar to reputable journals or well-known publishers. So they can be very difficult to spot. And even experienced researchers can be taken in. And earlier this year, for example, a professor contacted me because he had been tricked into publishing in a predatory journal. So, we often think it's just young, people in their early career stages that are prey to these journals, but they are very clever, and even experienced researchers can be misled. The next slide, please. So why are we worried? Why are we worried about these predatory publishers, and how are they harmful? Well, there are a number of reasons. First of all, of course, they are tricking people out of money, charging fees for services they do not really provide. But also, more importantly, in a way, unchecked research that is published can seem credible even if it's not. And therefore, we can have people being misled by research which hasn't been through proper peer review. Other researchers might use this false or poorly done research and build upon it. We often see nowadays how public trust in science can be damaged. And of course, the public can be misled by incorrect articles they find online. And that reduces the trust in science generally. And even if good research, is published in these journals, it can damage the reputation and career of the researcher. Next slide, please. One of the questions we're always asked at Think, Check, Submit is, well, do you have a list? Do you have a list of the bad journals or a list of the good journals? And indeed, early responses to the problem of predatory journals did include these block lists. But these lists don't help researchers develop long-term skills in evaluating journals. And the lists are not always fully reliable, and the criteria used is not always clear. You have to think, who is compiling the list? What subjective view are they bringing? And that's why we advocate the use of the Think, Check, Submit checklists, freely available from the website, to help researchers decide where they should be publishing. Next slide, please. So what is Think, Check, Submit? It's a global initiative that provides researchers with tools to help them assess the credibility of journals before submitting their work for publication. And all the tools on our website are freely available. And it was developed in response to the growing problem of predatory journals. And Think, Check, Submit is a tiny organization. All the work is done by volunteer committee members. Catherine is one of them. Absolutely, they are brilliant, our volunteers. And just a few hours a month paid work by me. So really, absolutely a volunteer-led organization. Next slide, please. And the initiative encourages researchers to follow a three-step process. Think, is the journal or book publisher you're considering appropriate for your research? Is it trustworthy? And does it align with your field of study? And I know Catherine will talk about that more later. Check. Look for key indicators of journal quality, such as peer review practices, membership in recognized organizations, and clear editorial policies. And submit only once you are confident that the journal or publisher is reliable and meets ethical standards. Next slide, please. As I say, our main resource is the website Think, Check, Submit, and here you can find all the checklists, and we have them in a number of translations in different languages. We have a video to help researchers understand about predatory publishing. I know we have a lot of librarians today in the audience. We have tours for librarians as well. We have PowerPoint presentations you can use. We now have posters, social media graphics that you can use. So librarians, please do come and have a look and use those tools if they are helpful to you. Next slide. Oh, I think that's, yes, and that's me done. Actually, there is no next slide for me. It's now over to Catherine. So Catherine's going to tell you what it's like in real life, helping researchers make those decisions. So over to you, Catherine.
Thanks, Lorraine. Hi, so my name's Catherine. This is my part of the talk about how to support researchers, and also if you are a researcher, to support yourself in identifying trusted journals and publishers for research. Let me just make sure I've got there we go. So a little bit of background, then I'm going to talk about how I frame publishing, 3 scenarios and what I do, and some other things to consider. This goes along well, actually, with all of the people that introduced themselves in the chat, which, as Lorraine said, it was just amazing to see all the different parts of the world that people said they were coming from. So my name is Catherine Steffen, and I am from Iowa City, Iowa, which is in the middle of the United States. But I've lived in the UK for the last 22 years, and I've lived in Liverpool in the northwest of England for about the last 13 years. And that photo on the left, there's Iowa, there's Liverpool. That's the library where I work and where I'm sitting in right now. And that's a photo of me trying to support, if there's any football fans out there, I was trying to support Norwich City play Liverpool Football Club. Needless to say, Norwich was not successful against Liverpool. So I am the librarian representative to Think, Check, Submit. and I am also a researcher engagement librarian here at Liverpool John Moores University. And I kind of wanted to frame a little bit about myself because some of the advice is framed by my experience working at more of a teaching, but a university that has some research in the northwest of England. We don't have a lot of money for open access charges, but we are part of a number of institutional open access agreements. And I do have access to, lots of resources. And I appreciate we've got people from around the world, and it's kind of to consider the options that you have where you are and kind of make the most of the options you have, but potentially seek out other things as well when it comes to publishing. And I do appreciate, even though in the UK, I would say, oh, I have no money. We are very privileged in terms of the access to where the researchers I support can publish. So the way that I frame publishing is I talk a lot about the fact that you need to think about your options when you're deciding where to publish. And I frame problematic or predatory or unethical publishing as a wider issue of publishing more generally. And I say to researchers, you need to research before you write your research. So this should also extend to where you publish. And this means that you need to search for a publication as part of your research, and also thinking about where you want to publish and then looking into that. And with all of that training, I include information about choice and due diligence. So this is a snapshot of some of the sessions that I run. We run different sessions around publishing, but within that, I am always talking about things of having researchers think about where they want to publish and deciding how they do so. I've found that a little bit easier to share with researchers rather than doing a session just on problematic publishing. I feel like when I talk about publishing and then I talk a little bit about predatory publishing, they're more willing to attend those sessions than if I just have a session that's called predatory publishing. And I have tried different versions of this. We always talk about the value of open access. For some of our researchers, this is because they are a funded researcher and it may be a requirement of their funder. Other times we just like to promote the fact that it means that more people can read your work, which may mean that they learn from what you do. They might be able to cite it, all these different things. But from our point of view, this is something that our researchers should be, thinking about in all of our training. So whether it's about publishing or it's about searching for information, we point out the stuff in the world that is open access. And we always point out aspects of both quantitative measures of like quality and metrics, and also that qualitative side of things. And we say that it's really important to consider both when you publish. So, for example, sometimes someone will say, well, is this in the top, I need a top quartile journal. And I always say back to them, what does that mean? Because of course, and which is a bit cheeky, but what does it mean in terms of the context of a ranking that someone's given it or somebody has told you that, thinking a little bit broader from that. And we don't provide people with a list. I don't tend to talk about quartiles a lot. I explain how things are ranked, but not as a marker of quality. It's just to tell them that this is the way, this is where it stands in terms of the context of that ranking. And we always talk about think, check, submit. So the things that Lorraine spoke about, again, we embed that within our training. So we want authors to take ownership for their choices and to be advocates for their own work. And we kind of put this under the umbrella of what I call due diligence. So before you publish, you need to be thinking about these potential places. And it takes time. It can take a lot of time, but it can save you time if you do it before you start. And we underscore the principles of think, check, submit. I've kind of framed it in 4 key principles. I always say to authors, there is a home for your work. Personally, I think too often researchers think very narrowly about where they want to publish. And this often sits with what we think of as like a traditional commercial publisher. I appreciate sometimes there are, depending on where you are, your university might put pressure on you to publish in certain places. There's different pressures on you, but a lot of times it is thinking very narrowly, this is where I want to publish, and it's a journal article. And I encourage authors to think that actually there's lots of different outputs and avenues and homes for your work. We move away from the viewpoint that they might hear from their supervisors and their line managers who say, this journal is best. You might be working with code, you might have a poster, a case study. And I think this is a good example. This is from my colleague, Liam Bullingham. It's Edge Hill University, which is again in the northwest of England. This was a snapshot of different things that were in their repository. And we talk a lot less about the best place and a lot more about the right place for you and your work. And your right place, it might be a commercial publisher. It might be a journal that is hosted by a university that has no impact factor. It might be a conference paper. It might be a blog post. And I'm not here to tell you this place is best, but I am here to tell you that you have options. I also say to people, like Lorraine has also spoken about, that there is not a single list to check. For those of you that work as a librarian, I wish that there was a list. I wish there were lists that you could check and it was safe and everything was fine, because it would save you lots of work and it would save time for people. But the reality is there is no list. And I actually have a problem with lists for a lot of the reasons that Lorraine said and why I think Check Submit doesn't have a list. It suggests that publishing is something that can be tackled simply. And I understand why they want them, but really lists are often actually complex, overcomplicated, and confusing. And if you think about it, who creates them? Who curates them? Who updates them and manages challenges to them? Sometimes people using indexing databases as their list, but what if you don't have access to that? It takes certain criteria to be indexed by certain places. Does that mean that they're good? How do you know that every journal within there is good? And how often are journals taken off? And, as I said, even if you do say check indexing lists, not everything is on there. There's evidence to suggest that these are often biased towards what is referred to as the global north, also very biased towards English language publications, and a lot of times for publications that would fit under STEM, science, technology, engineering, and not so much the arts. And it's also, in a way, about time. I don't have time to create a list, let alone keep it up to date. And also about the time of researchers. How do we make sure that everyone knows which lists to check? And what happens if people don't know? Who does all that advocacy to keep everyone up to date on where you should look? A list suggests that this process can be achieved by checking one thing, and I'm uncomfortable with that, especially as I'm here to support researchers. But in addition to that, and especially again for the librarians that are in the room, you are not the list. I am always happy to check. I probably say that 100 times a week. I am happy to check for you on this journal. And I will continue to say this because this is part of my advocacy, and I can advise, but I cannot check for every author all the time. And really what you want to do is educate them to make those choices themselves and choose and decide the best home for their work. And I also say authors have a choice, but the very important part of that is that not everyone has the same choice. And I totally understand that. But I am here to show people about the potential places to publish, to point out that they need to do due diligence, help them decide, and ultimately hope that they've done so. And if they encounter problems, I am also here to help them. We want researchers to avoid predatory publishing in a place where there's a hidden charge, where the journal is problematic, one that isn't peer reviewed, but sometimes they do. and that choice is theirs. And I'm here to help them with whether or not they felt like that was a good choice or a bad choice. So having said all that, I'm just going to talk through like 3 different scenarios of what happens to me quite a bit and sort of what it frames under this. So is this journal okay? I'll get an email. Does this journal cost money? And where should I publish? And how do I know if this is problematic or predatory? So the first question I get asked a lot, like someone will send me a list or one title, they'll say, is this journal okay? So what I do is I don't think that there's as many things where you get emails where the title is misspelled, and it does happen, but I'm less inclined to dismiss every email. I actually had an example of this yesterday, although not for publishing, where a colleague was using something called Impact Tracker. I don't know if anyone has used this, and someone else was using something called Track Impact. And we thought, oh my God, are there 2 systems? They were actually the same system, but they had slightly different names depending on how you got to them on the internet. So you never know, like if you need to kind of go that step further. So the first thing that I do is a basic internet search. Pick your web browser of choice, type in the name of that title, and you might need to go past that first page. See what it says. If you can't find it, if it's super similar, if it says the name of the title and then it says, is this predatory? It might give you pause. Again, I'm not going to completely dismiss it, because the next thing I always do is, if you can find the journal, go to the journal homepage. Again, you might think, okay, it's fine. The web page looks a bit strange. But again, I don't count things out just based on how the web page looks, because I think it's really important to check out these next things here. So the first thing, aims and scope. And I'm always saying this to authors. Can I tell what the journal is writing about? But also, just as important, are they writing about things that you're writing about? Because sometimes authors will think, this is where I have to publish. And then they find out that this journal doesn't take case studies or it doesn't take systematic reviews. So actually, it was never going to be a good home for your work. Check that aims and scope. And then other things like, do they have archived issues and archived articles? Are you able to click on them and see them? Can you see are there author guidelines about what you need to do as an author? Are those editors listed? If you want to take it a step farther than that, are the editors listed? And when you check those editors, if you search for them, do they have this journal listed on their webpage, their own university or organization webpage? Do they make a big deal about how quickly they do peer review? Do they have peer review? Can you tell? And then also things like, can you tell what the costs are to publish? And if these things all check out, again, I will maybe be a little bit more assured. If a journal says that they are indexed somewhere, if I feel the need, I might check on that indexing site to see if they are there. Again, I might check to see if those metrics check out. So if they say that they have a journal impact factor of such and such, or if none of the metrics seem to make sense, they seem to be made up metrics. Again, it kind of puts up these red flags of things to look at. And as I said, if those things check out and you feel comfortable, then proceed with caution. But there can be more checks if you're still unsure. And that's where I might check some of these other places. So as I said, I might check to see if they're indexed in places. If they say that they are in the directory of open access journals, I might go to the directory of open access journals and see if I can find it. Scopus's journal list, even if you aren't a subscriber, you can see what's indexed in there. So you can check that. If you do have subscriptions to things like Web of Science. And there's also a tool in the UK called the Open Policy Finder. That's a way to just look up titles. And this is a tool that a lot of people in the UK use to check the requirements to be putting author-accepted manuscripts in repositories. And if that doesn't check out and I can't see this journal anywhere in there, again, I'm like, ooh, does this actually exist? Because who else is using it? Are they archiving it anywhere? So just that extra step. And again, you don't have to do all of these. Sometimes it'll check out as soon as you do that search and you see, I see what this is. Other times you might go back to that author or yourself and say, right, there's a few red flags, but this seems to check out. And again, to say back to them, this is your choice now. I've given you this information and they can decide. And I do advise people, but I never say definitely no, because you never know the circumstances of how they found it. But it does seem to help. The other thing that I do get asked a lot is, does this journal cost money? And the thing that I always say to researchers is the golden rule of you need to know before you submit. So I did say my institution, we do not have an institutional open access fund. So there is never going to be any money from me whatsoever to help you publish anything. I appreciate that your university might be different. It might sit within departments, but for me, it is a hard no every single time, unless you are a funded researcher, so that you're funded by a research body in the United Kingdom and they've given us money to help support that. Again, I would still say to researchers, they need to check. We make this very clear on our web pages. I still get emails from authors that have published with different journals and say, Catherine, this is a really good article. This is a great journal. Can I have money? And I still say no. So I will say very clearly, I do not think that publishers make it very clear about charges, but you still need to know before you submit. And if you don't know, ask someone else. So if you're a librarian, ask a colleague, ask a librarian that's at your institution or someplace else. If you are a researcher, go to your library, ask the librarian there, or just ask someone else, a colleague, see if they can find it. Sometimes this includes charges for page and color charges. So again, just be careful and know ahead of time. I appreciate that this is sort of separate to predatory publishing, but you've got to check beforehand. And I have helped researchers that they've had to withdraw papers before because they didn't realize that. And again, as a librarian, I want to save you time. I want you to find that home for your work and have like a successful publishing process, which means that you're not publishing there, writing the paper for there, and then realize you can't publish there. So know before you submit. And if there's any publishers in the audience, make it easier for people to know how much stuff is going to cost. I will say that forever. The other thing to think about is sometimes there are waivers for open access publishing, but there's a few things just to keep in mind. And again, this is knowing before you submit. So this is usually only available for what we describe as gold open access journals. And that's what we mean by they're open from the point of publication straight away for everyone, and they may require an article processing charge. So they're only going to be for those sorts of journals. They are often only open to authors from current countries that are currently classified by the World Bank as low income or low middle income economies. So it'll be very dependent on the publisher. Sometimes they have lists of countries that are included. And again, that's worth checking with individual publishers. You can contact editors to check if waivers may be available to you in this particular paper. Sometimes guest issues or special issues might, do a one-off fee waiver. So it's worth asking. And also some journals offer waivers to people who review articles. Again, this needs to be agreed upon before publication, but it's just worth mentioning. I would always say, check beforehand, know what your options are, and don't assume anything, because you don't want to get a giant bill at the end and realize, I don't have any money to pay for this. I appreciate that some of these things require more work from you as a researcher, which, we're trying to push back on publishing to change those things. So I know it's easy for me to say, you can review a paper and then publish, but it can be an option. If you are already reviewing for people, take advantage of the fact that you may be able to get a waiver. So last but not least, where should I publish and how do I know if it's predatory or not? What I tend to say to people, again, I know this, I keep saying this, but authors have a choice. And so part of my job is to offer up choice, but offer alternatives. So a lot of my training, I talk to researchers about what I call like the 3 R's of publishing. So readership, reach, and rigor. If you get an email from a publisher or a journal and they say that they want you to publish here, or you find one on the internet and you've done the checks, you still want to be thinking about these 3 R's. So, who would you like to read the paper that you're going to be publishing or the output that you're publishing? How widely would you like to share it? Is open access important to you, your research, and what you're talking about? And last but not least, the rigor of the publication. So, what is the quality in terms of the other papers that are in there? Is it somewhere that you have cited before, read? Is it peer reviewed? What are the editorial standards? This isn't going to tell you, oh, yes, this is problematic, this isn't. But again, it's digging a little bit deeper into a particular publication to say, oh, this reaches the audience I want it to reach. It publishes the sort of papers that I'm reading myself, and it meets these standards that I'd like to adhere to with my publishing. And also, as I said, who and where do you read? Where do they publish? And where do your colleagues, the people that you admire, publish? So, if you're approached by a journal completely out of the blue and they ask you to publish for them, is that where you want to put your hard work? So try to remember, you are a very good researcher. You've done fantastic work. Where do you want that work to be shared with the rest of the world? Now, I've said all that. Some of the options are going to be very dependent on what is available at your institution. And I'd like to say that it's just about options, and that's going to be different. I saw loads of different countries in the chat here. It's going to be so different. I saw that there were people from Ethiopia, Moldova, and everywhere in between. The options to you are going to be different, but it's worth pointing out that you will have different options available to you. And it will depend on your country, your institution, and whatnot. But what are those options? So just a few things that I do when I'm showing authors the things that they might want potentially to look at. If you're not aware of the Directory of Open Access Journals, this is a place I often take researchers. So DOAJ, you can search for open access journals. The search functionality, you can do it by subject area. You can also do it by the searching like keyword search. But within that, what you can do is you can refine the search results. So you can look for journals that do not have an article processing fee. It might be that you want to publish in a particular language. You can filter by language. You can filter by country where those journals are based. I think I mentioned a lot of indexing sites are very, very English language specific. Not everyone wants to publish in English. DOAJ is a great place to locate journals that are not in English. And again, you might be working with someone from a different country in terms of collaborating with someone, and it might be a part of that. Hey, we've done this project with this country and we want to publish in this country. DOAJ is a great starting point. The other thing to point out is that lots of commercial publishers have journal finders. And what the things to remember with journal finders is that each publisher is going to only suggest titles that they publish. So the first one on the list, if I go to look at Emerald titles, journals, they're only going to show me Emerald ones, all the ones in there. The last one on the list there, Jane, it's a little bit more basic than the other ones, but it does search lots of publishers. And again, for each of these, you put in a few keywords, you can put in a title, you can put in a whole abstract, and it's going to suggest potential journals that you can publish in. So I appreciate that there's a lot of work involved in that, but again, it's about telling your colleagues, the people that you're helping to support. If you're a researcher yourself, there's lots of different places in the world to publish. Here are some of the options that are out there. And this is what I do with my researchers. They don't come back to me loads, but I'm assuming that some of them have found places to publish. Every so often, someone will tell me that they found a home for their work, which is lovely. So just some things to consider. Also, if anyone knows of any other good journal finders, do let me know. This is just a snapshot of some of them that I use, but I know that there's other ones around. And just some other things to consider within the wider context of like predatory publishing. Think Check Submit often gets asked about, like, what about titles that have lots of special issues, or sometimes, and there was one recently in the news where like a whole suite of journals were removed from an indexing site. What should I publish there? Are those still okay? And I would always go back to authors have a choice where they want to publish. I always say to people, if you out of the blue are asked to edit a journal, guest edit a special issue, and they're asking you to find all the authors, edit everything, do all the work, and then also pay to publish there, is that where you want to publish? Again, that's your choice. But I'd also reiterate to all of my authors, you do not have to pay to make your work open access. There are lots of journals that do not require payment to publish there. But also, in terms of this question, I would still say to authors, just because a particular publisher has been removed from an indexing site, I am against this. I'm against saying everything that they publish is bad. I still think it's worthwhile to check in that title, look at the content there, and I would argue that you still need to do your due diligence should you still, decide to apply somewhere. I also think too that it becomes this list. Well, oh, they've been removed, everything is bad. I still think it's worthwhile to check those individual journals and see if they match the standards to yourself and to others of a place that you want to publish. So it does happen sometimes that you might have ended up publishing someplace and you think like, what happens? Like, what do I do? And what we always say to people is, don't panic. It happens. As Lorraine said, she's been approached by people that are professors. And I think the first thing to say is, like I said, don't panic. I know that's easier said than done because I'm not you, and you probably would be like, horrified that this had happened. If there is a way out, ask your legal department if you have one. I know that at my university, we used to, now we like outsource to someone, so it can take a while. But if there's anyone that you can ask about, hey, I've done this, is there a way to retract or remove that from a particular journal? And then other things that you can think about doing, no longer link to that article if you feel like you can. Also, that work still stands despite its home. So it might have been a really good paper, but don't feel like the work that you worked on and that you can like never talk about again because of where it is. Don't be tempted to resubmit somewhere else. Just because you don't like that journal, it doesn't mean that you can now take that again because of copyright issues you've already published there. But maybe there's another part of that work. So perhaps you spoke about the methods in one of your papers. Well, maybe you can take that work and talk about the findings in a different paper and publish that someplace else. Just don't make sure that you're not resubmitting the exact same paper. Take it from a different vantage point. You might have a completely different paper that you can write depending on what you're talking about. And again, I know easier said than done, but move on. It does happen. And at some point you have to stop beating yourself up over it. It happens. As Lorraine said, the person I supported with it was quite high up and they just kind of got caught out. And what they've done is they've moved on, don't really refer to it anymore. It's not on their staff profile. And also, again, this isn't something that we can all solve here, but there are things that employers can do to help with this. So researchers are under an immense amount of stress to publish, to get lots of publications, to help universities. Employers could rethink about how they measure, and by saying one home is good and one home is bad, and to stop being blinded by certain titles. So if someone has published here that you think, oh, they must be a good researcher, and if they haven't published here, well, they're a bad researcher, because that's not true. You can't judge a researcher or even the contents of everything in a journal based on the fact that they've had a few good papers in it. And I would say to employers, do you check publications on CVs? So if researchers are feeling pressured to have lots of publications, Are you checking when they have a list of 100 papers on a CV? Do you also consider using narrative CVs, or say to researchers, show me your 5 best papers that represent your work better? This is a much bigger issue than I think all of us can solve, and certainly not think, check, submit. But I do think it is something to consider, that there are reasons why it's not just about making money. It's also that, these predatory publishers know that there's a lot of pressure on researchers. So rethinking the way that we measure them could potentially help with people making those decisions, or thinking, oh, I need to publish something. So just some final words of advice. Ask for help. You can always, my email's on there on the last slide. You're welcome to email me too, but ask for help from other people. If you aren't sure, or you aren't sure how to get out of something, great place to, reach out to Think, Check, Submit. One of our members is COPE. They've got a great guide of different resources in terms of scenarios and whatnot. So ask for help. Remember, there is not a single list to check. So you can't just go one place and say, yes, that's fine. And last but not least, think, check, and then submit. And thank you.
We want to thank the two of you, and you clearly covered more than just predatory publishing and put it in a broader context, which we appreciate. For some reason, my picture isn't too good, but that's all right. Do you want to answer the questions, or would you like me to read them? Whatever is best for you and Lorraine. How shall we handle this? But we have some very interesting questions for sure. And
we do. Absolutely. I've answered some. I've typed the answers to some of them. But yeah, I think we'll tackle as many as we can on the webinar, and then we're happy to follow up afterwards. I think the one that is a good one for Catherine is that one from Ahmed, who says, is it possible for major journal indexing databases like Scopus, Web of Science, and Medline to include predatory journals?
And instead of saying predatory, I think I'd say like questionable, like for me. So for me to answer that, I would say it's totally possible for databases to index journals that are kind of questionable. But part of that is because there's still this like broader metric, whether it's site score or journal impact factor, that we assume that all content within a particular journal is of a certain quality because of that. And it's not, they definitely have checks on journals. But what I'd say is there's always going to be a chance that a journal that was very reputable 10 years ago doesn't necessarily have the same editorialship and editorship and quality. And that's why I'd say, I wouldn't say like, oh, there's predatory things, but I'd say you still need to dig and look at those titles. So just because it's in there, I'm not going to give it the seal of approval. I want to look and see, what are they publishing? Who are the people that are publishing there? And what about the content of those papers? So I think they could, because, and the same with Directory of Open Access Journals, things are in there that some people will say, oh, well, didn't they get banned from here or whatever? And again, that's where I say you still have to look at the title and see what it actually is. I don't know, Lorraine, if you've got anything to add to that.
No, I think that's absolutely it. And I think also, Catherine, you mentioned the point. Journals do change. The editors change. Sometimes the ownership of journals changes, and that can go either way. I mean, you could have one that was perhaps questionable and makes changes, or vice versa. So always important to check. There's another really good question, Catherine, which is right up your street, as it were, which is from Faiz, I hope I pronounced that correctly, forgive me if not, who says, is Think, Check, Submit enough to identify all predatory journals, or are other tools needed to confirm the status of a predatory journal?
I don't think Check, Submit can ever be enough. I mean, like I said, I wish, because I suppose, like, I'm not against publishers. My husband works for a publisher. We have publishers on the Think, Check, Submit team, but there are publishers that want to make money. Like, that is their bottom line, and they know that they can make money from people. And so we try to update what we say in our Think, Check, Submit advice, but predatory publishers are like Wiley. They change, not Wiley the publisher, but like they change their practices to catch people out in different ways. And so what I'd say is I think it's enough in the sense of, I would hope that if you look into it and do those sorts of things, it's going to help you avoid that. But it's never going to be a catch-all. But that, I think the catch-all is talking to other people, looking to see what the papers are in that publication, checking the author names. If you've never heard of a publication, if you've never heard of any of the editors and have never heard of any of the authors, or maybe you've heard of it, but you don't see any reference to it anywhere on their own pages, that should raise enough alarm bells that you go, I don't think that I can publish there.
Yeah.
If
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, I had a problem with my face freezing, but I think what you're giving everybody are tools and methodology. And that's really important. It's not that you can say, this is this, or that is that, or this isn't the scope but it's a process. And if you incorporate the process, if you use the process, you're going to be a lot more successful. And that's the take I get from your presentation.
Yeah, thank you. And I think this kind of there was a question a little bit further down about, are all free publishing journals authentic? And again, I think it's about thinking, where do you want to publish your work? So I've had it before where we had a researcher that was reached out to by a commercial publisher. They wanted to do a guest issue. They wanted to publish for them, but they had to come up with like 1,200 Swiss francs or something for like 10 different papers. And she was like, how do we do this? And we found a journal that was based at the University of Minnesota, the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis, that was a free, authentic, open journal. But the way that she knew that it was like authentic or a place was that she could look up the editors there, see their research, look at the other things that were within that publication. So I would never say, oh, if it's free, it's not as good, because that's not the case at all. But as we said, as part of this process, it might be that you've got some money to pay for publishing, and the right home for you, or the best home for you, is going to be a place that you have to pay. So as Lenny has said, this process of kind of deciding, and again, those 3 R's, like, who do I want to read this? What is the reach of this journal? And what's the rigor of it? And sometimes you'll go, well, I can publish here, but no one's going to be able to read it because it's behind a paywall. And the work I'm doing, I want more people to read it. So I'm going to be looking for a place that I can make it open access, and there's not a charge, for example.
Another thing is, there may not be a right, perfect answer. Years ago, I was at a workshop, and I had the participants select a journal from an abstract and small groups. And I had physicians arguing with each other about which journal to submit it to. So as I say, it may not be a right answer. It's maybe what you're most comfortable with, what makes the most sense to you.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think further down too, I think that there was 2 questions towards the bottom that I thought were really good, and a lot more people should consider that. But it was saying, what happens if like your journal kind of passes those tests or the things that you're trying to do, and then it's later discovered as predatory? And I think that's really tricky, because I know that there are some countries that like they look at that in terms of promotion and progression, that like if you'd published in certain places, and then they'll say, oh, if it was before this time. And that just seems like really complex, like that there'd be a lot in that to kind of go, oh, well, because Lorraine published in that journal pre-2020, it's okay, but after this time. And I don't actually know the answer to that question, but I do think that like that's where universities need to be better, and institutions need to be better about how they measure like the quality of publications, that they don't just say, give me a list of your publications. And if they notice a journal that maybe is slightly problematic, they don't just immediately discount it, that you're able to say, no, yes, I published there, but actually it was about this, and this was an important research project for me. I don't know, Lorraine, I don't know what they say in the wider context, but I find myself feeling really uncomfortable with it because it's not the author's fault at all. Like in some cases it's not, but that process of judging people later means that they get caught up in things that they wouldn't have necessarily been caught up in.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. I completely agree. And it's a system around people that often works against them. There is a question here, and it says, do reliable journals contact authors to write commentaries, or is it only predatory journals that do that? Do you want to answer that, Catherine, or I can?
I've heard of that a couple of times where I've had people, and again, like I suppose it's kind of what we've been saying and what Lenny sort of reiterated is I wouldn't completely discount it because I remember, like, I can't help resist, an email will come in and it's not for me to answer in our shared mailbox. And I'll think like, oh, why have they? And then you look into it and you go, oh, actually, the person that asked them to do it is one of their colleagues, or they've heard of them, or so I wouldn't immediately discount it. I'd be looking into the home that it's going to be in, and also sometimes that is going to be the sort of the output that you're going to write. It might not be a full paper itself. Just like I know that sometimes within academia, there's some people that say, well, I want original research. I don't want a systematic review. In certain areas of research, a systematic review is like what you do. Like, and they're large scale, they can go on for a long time. And when you hear people kind of immediately discount that, you kind of go, oh, that's not, I wouldn't do that. So I would say, I wouldn't say that it's not, they're not reliable, but again, it's looking to see who's made the invite. Is it genuine? And I always think, do they actually know your work? Like if they've kind of found you, and this sounds really cynical. I always feel bad for some researchers where I think, oh, like I want you to know that you're really special as a researcher, but they've asked you to do this special issue because they've probably searched the internet and looked for people that are in that field rather than finding you. So it's kind of about having that little sense check to know, is it me or is it that they want some money from me? Which I always feel bad because I want researchers to know that their work is fantastic. It's just that sometimes people are trying to take advantage of the fact that they might not realize who they are. I thought the question, again, and I don't know if Lorraine, that you would want to mention this about the quite long question, but that issue of, the global South, the global North, and the publishing thing. And again, this wider issue of, and we see certain things as a like a slightly cynical librarian, where you see mostly global North, companies doing things where, you think, oh, and I think both of your options are really interesting. Like, and there is a movement that is growing that is like saying, why are we publishing in these places that do not acknowledge the research strength, and also that are doing, as you said, this epistemic apartheid. And I don't know all the answers. I just know there's a lot more being spoken about it. Lorraine, I don't know if that was something that.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I completely agree. And it's really interesting, as you say, hearing these different discussions, and really powerfully, I think people looking to say, well, we don't need necessarily to be part of these North European journals, we can do our own publishing. And I just think, it's such a shame because, there are so many issues in the world, our climate, health issues, where we need collaboration across the world, and we need to be building on every researcher's knowledge. And to have that sort of thing happen is just so disappointing, I think.
Yeah, this sounds like some of the issues that Research for Life is trying to address with the new strategic plan that goes to 2030, to make it more collaborative, to integrate our constituency in the decision making. But but that's just one organization that's trying to deal with this. That doesn't take away from the validity of the broader discussion.
And this is slightly separate from that, but so I'm quite involved with my day job around stuff with open research, and I know that one of the things that we are trying to encourage, although not as many researchers take up on this, is looking in, so like using things like the Directory of Open Access Journals, looking at databases of journals that are based not in the global north, and that authors that are based like where I am in the UK, that they're making conscious choices to not always be publishing with these like, commercial publishers, and so that's something that, again, it's not solving this problem, but I do think that researchers like in institutions in the UK could be doing more to not always be looking to a certain cohort of publications. And if they're working with colleagues in, say, for example, like that, there was someone in the chat that was from Ethiopia. If you're working with colleagues in Ethiopia, discussing with your partners there, where do you want this publication to go? Do you want it to go in a publication that is based here? Or is it going to be better to be putting this in something that's published in Ethiopia, or fill in the blank for the country? And I think that there's a lot more that can be done in terms of, again, for a lot of researchers here, they'll say, well, oh, what if it's not as prestigious? And what if this? Well, actually, it's about when you're doing co-production, thinking about where everybody wants to be putting the outputs of that work and making sure that people are represented in ways that they want to be represented.
Yeah, there is a question also, if I've got time to turn to it, and it's specifically references Beale's list. Beale was an academic who published a list of predatory journals, and it's no longer available, although there are people trying to bring it back. And I just want to bring that up now as well in this context, because we talked about the not having a list, and the fact that it's subjective. Who's going to do it? Who's going to maintain it? What are their reasons for doing it? But I think as well that, and I'm not saying this about Beale in particular, but those types of lists, very often, they are making judgments based around commercial journals in North Europe or the United States. And if they see a journal which perhaps is being produced in a country or a place that doesn't have such great resources, maybe the website might not be so smooth or nice, but there's nothing wrong with the journal itself. They're not predatory, they're publishing with goodwill, but they can be included in those lists. So I think that's another reason to be really, really wary of any of these watch lists.
This is a bit of a tangent, but it relates to all these issues. Research for Life has been working with the Directory of Open Access Journals to get more publishers, editors to submit their journal for inclusion in their database, which of course is in Research for Life. And the idea of this is to bring up the quality of the journals that are being published, because you have to meet certain criteria, like having open access, having an editorial board, having a review board. And we're very pleased to work with them, and they're very pleased, again, like you two, to have access to our constituency. So that, I think, fits in the broader picture. I also wanted to very briefly comment that some institutions, especially in the West, have criteria for promotion and tenure that are antiquated.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they're basing it on a model that was maybe good 25 years ago, and they should have this broader context. If you are able to publish and reach your audience, that should be the #1 criteria. Yeah, sorry. Okay.
That's fine. I was going to say, I don't think that we have time to answer all the questions. If Research for Life passes them over to Lorraine and myself, I'm quite happy to reply if that's okay, because I just know that there are some really good questions and I'm just not sure that we have time to answer all of them today.
Can we put your email addresses in the chat? That might be helpful.
Sure.
Yeah.
There we go.
Just trying to look. How much is there more time? I'm trying to, how much more time do we
You
have?
have another, we put 15 after, so you have at least another 8 minutes
Okay.
and a
Let me
little.
just see if,
Yeah, so continue if you'd like.
sure. Let's see. So the question that I just see next in the list, Lorraine, was about if your work has been published in a predatory journal, is there a way to salvage your research and republish it in a reputable journal? And then there was like kind of a question further down, like about why couldn't I resubmit? I suppose there's a distinction. If you've submitted a paper and like they reject it or nothing happens with it, then totally you could take your paper and submit it someplace else. What we're talking about is if people are like, oh no, I've published in a predatory place. Now the problem is that as part of that process, you probably or you may have handed over your copyright to that publisher. And just in terms of like the, ethics of publishing, you probably, you shouldn't then be, taking that same paper and submitting it to another publication. That also stands even when it's not predatory, because obviously you don't want to waste the time of the publisher, of the journal, all that kind of stuff. What I would always say is, as I said about you, maybe that article, if there's a way to salvage it in terms of you might have written about a particular aspect of research, there isn't anything stopping you from, obviously you don't want to take the exact same thing, but maybe you spoke about a part of that, and then you might talk about the methods of the paper. So for any kind of research project, the way that you're applying that in terms of a journal article, you could change the way that you've written it. There isn't a way to kind of wholesale take everything you've written and put in that predatory journal and then directly submit it someplace else. But it might be a way that maybe you talk about it in different spaces. So, and if you don't want a reference to it, it might be if you're going to use like if there's a conference paper or something about, if you go to a conference, you could talk about the work and not necessarily reference the article itself. And that's where, you feel bad, because I know the researcher that was at John Moore's, what she wrote about was like really good. And I think what she then did was go, okay, well, can I expand that research a little bit more so that it actually builds upon what I found out? So it is a different article than the one that I had submitted.
Okay, so officially we have 5 more minutes. Does anyone else want to add a question that can be addressed in the last few minutes?
I've never, there was a question about third party to outsource dealing with retractions. I've never used a third party, but I'm just going to find, I know that COPE, I was actually using COPE yesterday. So is it, I'm trying to get the acronym correct, Lorraine. I should know this. The Committee on Publication Ethics. Is that the acronym? They have a really good resources page where you can type in like what's happened and they will give you advice on like how to approach that. So the reason why I used it is because someone reached out to me because their journal had been hijacked. So like other people had taken over the journal and made it seem like it was still like the other people. And COPE had like scenarios and then also like how to write back to people to do it. And I hadn't used their resources very much, but Lorraine, if you have anything else to share, I'll search for it right now in my web browser and see if I can.
I've put the link in the chat actually.
Okay.
While you were talking. Yeah, and COPE really has some, I should say, really excellent information on the website. So yeah, really, really useful for everybody.
This one here, oh yeah, the guidance, and you're able to search with different things. Oh yeah, there's the main page, and then within there's a section called guidance, and you can type in. Like I said, I was surprised. I do all this stuff, and I had never, and COPE is on our panel, and I had never like used their stuff, but there's some really good, useful things in there. And obviously it's built by members of COPE. So there's loads of publishers that are involved in it. So their expertise is going to be like the best that you're going to get in terms of how to deal with that kind of stuff. I don't know of any kind of paid third party thing. I would always say be looking to examples. And then a lot of it is that you're, emailing and coming up with like a template to kind of, share with people. I think.
Okay, shall I sum up and first of all, we thank you. Second of all, I have two observations. You were so right to expand it beyond just the concept of predatory publishing, because I think you have given people tools and a methodology. And as we always talk about when we discuss publishing and this and that and all the aspects of it and writing, you need to explore the resources and figure out what works for you. And I think Catherine and Lorraine have done a good job of giving you a wonderful overview of the whole process, but then also giving you tools to use, especially their project. So we appreciate that broad context besides just talking about, everyone wants to know about what to do with predatory publishing, but it's much more than that. And everybody has to get their own skills. And we encourage all over 300 of you to share the material with your colleagues. If you're an early researcher, share it with the other people in your section, your department, your division. If you're a postgraduate student starting to do research, share it with your colleagues. If you're a senior lecturer, please share it with your students. So that's what we appreciate, you having the tool and explaining it and putting it in the broad context. So any other comments? Would anyone like to put a thank you in chat or even say something to the two individuals?
Just to add, Lenny, we do have a sort of basic PowerPoint presentation. It's on our website, a PDF version, but if people contact me, if they're doing a presentation, their colleagues, students, about predatory publishing, I can send them that and they can, use it and build on it.
And I neglected our one major constituency, which I have been in, is the librarians. So please write to Lorraine and get access to the presentation you can use at your institution. We don't believe in reinventing the wheel. We believe in using the resources that are out there and expanding the knowledge that way. Okay, we have any other comments or?
Just thank you so much. This was such a pleasure and a privilege to get to speak to everybody. And like I said, I'm going to be going home and telling my kids how many different countries in the world we're in we're here today. So thank you for letting us represent from the UK, but it was great to be here.
Absolutely. It's been, a real honor to be invited along and to see, people from all over the world. It's wonderful.
It's a pleasure having both of you too to do this. So we appreciate it. Thank you very much. And I think we're right on time. We said an hour and 15 minutes. And everyone have a good afternoon, because most of you, it is the afternoon. And some of us will go off to another Zoom call today. Thank you very much.
All right. Cheers, Lenny.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Cheers.
There come the thank yous. Yeah.